Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hi, you are very welcome. This is Reading the Past and I'm Dr. Cat. As we have already discussed in a few videos on this channel, and I will be linking the most relevant ones in my description box, the Tudors were keenly aware of the power of portraiture. We know, for example, that they offered patronage to a whole host of artists, people like Hans Holbein the Younger and Nicholas Hilliard. And these are, of course, individuals whose work is still being used by specialists today as a tool through which they might explore the 16th century English court and its inhabitants. Even though Holbein and to a certain extent Hilliard, arguably I'd say, have the greatest name and visual recognition for us today, they obviously were not creating in a vacuum. Some of their contemporaries are totally obscured from our view. I mean, do we not often read that such and such a work was produced by an anonymous or unknown artist? But on occasion, we do get more, although ultimately no less ambiguous of an identification. Take, for example, these two paintings, one of Katherine Parr and one of the Lady Mary, later Queen Mary I. Both of these images have featured in countless videos on this channel. The artist connected with these pieces is known simply as Master John. And what that means is that this individual was a master of his craft called John. And that's it. That is all we know of his identity. Well, almost all. Because in addition, we do know that he was working in the mid-1540s at the English royal court. And we can also say that his work, of which these are two extant pieces, shows the clothing of his subjects in a level of detail that some have come to describe as, quote, obsessive. And this is something, but by no means is it a lot of information. What other works did he produce? How long did he work for? We simply don't know. At least, not yet. Fortunately, we do know more about the artist we are going to be looking at today. But before we take a look at today's topic, I want to say an absolutely massive thank you to History Hit for sponsoring another video on this channel. I want to start by drawing your attention to this, the History Hit Miscellany, which promises to be full of answers to your pressing history questions. It launches at the end of this month, September 2023, but it is available for pre-order now. And while I'm waiting for that to arrive, I will keep binge watching on the content on the History Hit platform. I just finished watching Real Fake History, the alternate history of the Battle of Bosworth.
It was a battle that saw the end of the Plantagenets and the beginnings of a new dynasty, the Tudors. Richard III versus Henry Tudor, the head-to-head to decide the fate of England. The outcome would change the course of history and shape the world in which we live today. But what if it hadn't? What if it wasn't Richard III who was defeated and killed that day, but Henry Tudor? How would history have changed? Would we remember Richard III as having had a magnificent, successful reign? Would there have been an English Reformation? A break with Rome? What if Richard had won the Battle of Bosworth?
I love this programme and I know that you will too. History Hit brings you the stories that shape the world through their award-winning online history channel and podcast network. It's like Netflix, but it's all history. With History Hit, you can stream and download hundreds of hours of original history documentaries anywhere, anytime, on any device. You can watch on your mobile, tablet, desktop, Xbox or your TV. Brought to you by expert historians such as Dan Snow, Professor Susanna Lipscomb, Dan Jones and more. And as well as already having hundreds of expert-led programmes, they add 2 more every week. Click the link in my description box to find out more and to subscribe to History Hit. As an added bonus, History Hit are offering my viewers a very special discount. If you use the code READINGTHEPAST30 at checkout, then you will get 30% off of an annual subscription. Thanks again to History Hit for sponsoring this video. But now it is time to take a look at the life and works of Hans Eworth. While we don't know when Hans was born, we do know that he was born and raised in Horn in the Low Countries. We know that his parents were called Peter and Katherine, that Peter was a cheesemaker and a merchant. We know that Hans had siblings. We know that one of his brothers grew up to be a painter, while another would grow up to become a jeweller. Hans moved to Antwerp by 1540, and we know this because it was in that year that he joined the list of members of the Painters' Guild of St. Loup there in Antwerp. He is listed as being a freeman of the guild, and from this we can extrapolate that Hans previously trained or was apprenticed in that particular craft. But when he was apprenticed, or with or to whom, is unknown, at least for now. Within a few years, Hans would move to England. It has been suggested that he made this move in an attempt to escape religious persecution on the continent, that Hans may have been one of a number of Protestant refugees who settled in England at this time and indeed in the years that followed. There is a Nicholas Eworth that is listed as living in the parish of the King's Hospital in London in 1545. His name is found in the letters of denisation and acts of naturalisation for aliens in England. By aliens, they do mean strangers, or what we might call foreigners or immigrants. In the same collection of documents, we find a John Eworth. John becomes Jan, becomes Hans. Eworth, Eworth sound pretty similar. He is listed as being in the parish of St. Thomas Hospital in 1549. Some scholars have argued that Nicholas and John were in fact the same person, the person that we are calling Hans today, while others believe them to be separate but perhaps blood-related individuals. So either Hans was living in London under the name Nicholas back in 1545, or perhaps he followed his family member called Nicholas there and entered the records for himself in 1549. John or Hans received his letters of denisation, a status that is akin to permission or leave to remain, something that recognises an individual as being resident in England, a status that confers rights upon that individual. These documents were received by Hans on the 29th of October 1550. We can also use these documents, these records, to trace Hans's movements in and around London, because by 1551 we have a Master Hans resident in St Saviour's, Southwark. In the next year, 1552, in the same parish, we have someone called John Eworth, painter. Presumably this refers to the same person. These records show us that Hans remains in this place until at least 1559. We have later locations for his residences too, including the parish of Bridge Without. He's there in 1567. The parish of St Mary Overy, Southwark in 1568. Later he is in the ward of Farringdon Without in St Bride's parish. In 1571, Hans was described as a householder who had lived, quote, within Bridewell House, meaning Bridewell Hospital, in the parish of St Bride, Fleet Street, for 2 years. Hans was registered as a member of the Dutch church at Austin Friars. This was one of the Protestant stranger churches. In the 1559 to 61 list, Hans is named as Jan Eworth. He is also listed as having a wife called Neleke or Neleki. However, no other reference or indeed record to Hans ever having been married is known to exist, and certainly she does not appear in the Dutch church list of 1567, which Hans does show up in. We do know that Hans employed servants. There was an Arnold Derrickson and a John Mitchell, and it is believed that they were his artistic apprentices and presumably later journeyman workers in what we think was his artistic studio. Hope Walker explains that, quote, some of his, meaning Hans's, pictures reflect more than one hand in their making, so it is possible that some works may be studio creations. Additionally, references to Hans the painter and Hans the drawer in the English documentary record from the 1560s may refer to lost works by Eworth. Currently, known works are connected to Eworth through documentary evidence and surviving monograms, and demonstrate a highly skilled, careful approach to picture making that often included preparatory drawings applied to panel. Walker adds that, quote, he, Hans, was also extremely proficient at detail, particularly with cloth and jewels, as can be seen from his earliest surviving work, A Turk on Horseback, which dates to 1549 and is today held in a private collection. The subject of this painting has since been identified as Suleiman I, also known as Suleiman the Magnificent. He was the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire. Suleiman was born around 3 years after King Henry VIII, and his rule lasted from 1520 to 1566. There is, however, absolutely no evidence that Hans ever saw the Sultan in person, or that he had any opportunity to draw him from the life. And we also don't know who commissioned this piece, if indeed anyone did. Perhaps, though, this was a way for this particular artist to set out his stall, so to speak, to show off to potential patrons the majesty that he was capable of rendering. Is this feasibly a thing that might well appeal to an English noble or royal who was seeking to commission a portrait of their own? Was this painting in fact commissioned, or indeed did Hans hope to sell it simply because of the person depicted within it? Robert Tytler explains that, quote, Eworth's intriguing work derives from a series of woodcuts made by his friend and countryman Peter Coke van Alst, who had visited Constantinople and drawn scenes from local life. We have these 3 works, all dated to 1550, that seem to me to be presenting a variety of styles, things that Hans could display his proficiency in. We have Sir Thomas Wyndham, Sir John Luttrell, and Henry Fitzalan, 12th Earl of Arundel. These 3 individuals were all, in their various ways, prominent figures in the regime that supported the Protestant boy king, Edward VI. However, it would be this boy king's Roman Catholic half-sister and successor, Queen Mary I, that Hans would become the principal court painter to in England. In 1554, Hans produced these portraits of the Queen, in which I'm sure you will see, and indeed agree, the attention to detail is striking, especially when we look at the fabrics and the jewels and how they have been rendered. Also dated to the same year, 1554, is this portrait of an unknown lady. It has been suggested that the figure depicted is Jane Dormer, and Jane was a highly favoured, if not the favourite, lady-in-waiting to Queen Mary I. Here we have Hans Eworth, a signed-up member of the Dutch Protestant Refugee Church, painting this Roman Catholic queen and her co-religionist court and nobles. He would go on to paint a young Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, in 1555. A decade later, this boy would marry Mary Queen of Scots, and would then father the future James VI of Scots and First of England. Hans would paint Henry again before his marriage, and this time alongside his brother Charles. This painting is dated to 1563. Hans is also recorded as having worked as a jeweller and goldsmith, and there certainly seems to have been a family connection to this kind of work. As I mentioned earlier, indeed at the start of the video, one of Hans's brothers would grow up to work as a jeweller and also, in fact, as a diamond cutter, presumably having the requisite training for this. There was additionally a ruby cutter called Lancelot Ewerts, thought to be another relative of Hans's, presumably because of that similar surname. Lancelot is recorded as having been in London too, because he died there in September 1570. It has been suggested that Hans Eworth may be the artist behind a miniature portrait of Queen Mary I that was painted onto a gold disc. With his complementary skills as painter, jeweller and goldsmith, he could have made both the canvas and also the work. When Queen Mary I died in 1558, she was succeeded by her half-sister, who became Queen Elizabeth I. The team at the National Portrait Gallery explained that during the previous reign, quote, he, meaning Hans, received the large majority of his portrait commissions from Catholic patrons. This close association with the Roman Church was a major reason for his fall from court favour during the reign of Elizabeth. Perhaps by taking a look at Hans Eworth's extant work thought to date from this period, we might find some evidence for this. Certainly, I think we can argue that his patronage network may be viewed as having become somewhat less auspicious, perhaps even actively risky. He was commissioned for this piece by Mary Neville, Baroness Dacre. Indeed, he would be commissioned by her on 2 occasions. The first, this one, was produced in or before 1558. Here we see this granddaughter of a convicted and executed traitor, namely Edward Stafford, 3rd Duke of Buckingham, here seated at her desk. In front of her is an open book. She is dressed in fine silks and furs. Her linen shift is decorated with hand-embroidered blackwork. She is also well furnished with jewels. Behind her hangs a portrait of her first husband, Thomas Fiennes. The frame around this portrait bears the year 1540. Thomas was convicted of murder, and in 1541 he was hanged at Tyburn, and so he was executed in the manner of a common criminal. He was not beheaded, as nobles could usually expect to be. Baroness Dacre clearly approved of this finished work because she would commission Hans for a further work in 1559. And depending on the actual date when the first work was produced, this second work may have been made just 1 year later. In this second work, she would have herself painted seated beside her son Gregory. Mother and son are both sumptuously dressed. The fabric of their garments, expensive, no doubt imported wares, has been rendered spectacularly, as have the jewels that they are adorned with. Through this painting, I would argue, the viewer is being shown a family that is wealthy, fortunate, and that is fitting, because it is believed that this work was commissioned to celebrate the fact that Queen Elizabeth I had restored the son, Gregory, to the rank of Baron Dacre. This was a title that had been stripped from Gregory's father Thomas and his heirs following Thomas's execution in 1541. I do think it is interesting that Hans Eworth chose to paint James Stuart in around 1561. James Stuart was the illegitimate half-brother to Mary Queen of Scots, and here he is being painted in the very same year that Mary returned to rule in Scotland. My interest in relation to this is piqued because I think this move on the part of Hans Eworth can be read in different ways. On the one hand, James Stuart was a supporter of the Scottish Reformation, and so painting him might be a way for Hans to reiterate his own Protestant leanings and credentials. However, James Stuart was, at least at the start, the chief supporter and advisor to his sister the Queen, and Mary Queen of Scots was seen by many as Elizabeth's rightful heir, and by a fair few as more than that, as the true Queen of England. Is it possible that by painting her brother, Hans was hoping to lay the groundwork for a potential return to favour in the next reign? Hans would paint the Duke and Duchess of Norfolk in 1563 and 1562 respectively. The Duke in question was Thomas Howard. He was a kinsman to Queen Elizabeth I. He was also a Roman Catholic, who is suggested to have been the individual who commissioned Thomas Tallis to produce spem in allium. I will leave my recent video on Tallis linked. As for this Duchess, she was Thomas's second wife. Her name was Margaret, and she was Lady Jane Grey's cousin on Jane's father's side. In 1571, Thomas Howard, 4th Duke of Norfolk, was implicated in the Ridolfi plot. This plot sought to dethrone Queen Elizabeth in favour of Mary Queen of Scots. Thomas Howard would be executed for treason in 1572. Between the end of the 1560s and the early years of the 1570s, Hans was travelling to Calais and between Antwerp and London on his own and potentially on his wider family's business. But in addition, is it possible that by doing this, by leaving court, leaving London and removing himself out of England at various points, is it possible that Hans was also looking to distance himself from some of his more dangerous patrons and the plots that they were making? Or was he simply hoping to diversify his income streams? Maybe he hoped that by travelling he would find inspiration or even a commission that might be the thing to return him to that royal favour that he had once so enjoyed. If the last of these was the case, the aspiration, then in this regard, Hans might actually have been successful. In 1569, Hans created this painting of, and indeed for, Queen Elizabeth I. She is pictured alongside 3 goddesses, Venus, Juno and Minerva, or alternatively, that's Aphrodite, Hera and Athena. This image is a reworking of the Judgment of Paris, but in this painting, that famous beauty contest gets a new ending. The prize, now a royal orb to replace the former golden apple, is shown to be Elizabeth I's. It is she who is thus the fairest of them all. The original beauty contest and its outcome eventually led to the Trojan War. This painting flatters Elizabeth. It shows her that through her intervention, her rule, her judgment, the result is going to be peace rather than conflict. Additionally, some have also read the beckoning that we are seeing being done by Juno or Hera, where she appears to be asking Elizabeth to follow the goddesses, or perhaps to come and meet with the naked Venus or Aphrodite as a message of encouragement for Elizabeth herself to marry. Perhaps then this painting was commissioned as a gift for Elizabeth by one of her courtiers, an individual who hoped beyond hope that the Queen might marry and produce an heir for England. The fact that a visitor to Whitehall Palace in 1600 made reference to having seen this piece there indicates, I think, that whatever the intention behind this painting, whatever its message, Elizabeth clearly liked it. It was not long after this painting was produced that Hans Eworth was in the official employ of the royal court. Now, in addition to being able to record the likenesses of the royals and nobles of England, he would also receive payment for his services to their entertainments too, because the documents of the Office of the Master of the Revels show that in June 1572, Hans's artistic skills were being deployed in the service of a court masque. This one took place at Whitehall Palace, quote, before Elizabeth and Duke Montmorency, ambassador for France. Hans was paid for drawing and painting of diverse and sundry patterns, vis-a-vis of the chariot and mount. The court masque for New Year's Day 1573 also required Hans' expertise, as did the entertainments at Candlemas 1574. In 1576, Hans was in Antwerp to meet a man, a London merchant and broker, about his purchase of 2 horses. From Antwerp, he travelled to Portugal, again on business. He made plans to settle this debt in regards to the purchase of these horses upon his return from this particular trade trip. There is, however, no evidence that he managed to do so. Hans Eworth died in the later months of 1578, or possibly in the early months of 1579. His cause of death, place of death, and the location of his burial are, at least for now, unknown. So what do you think of Hans Eworth, of his life and work? I have only shown a selection of his known pieces of work in today's video, and I wonder, were any of them a particular standout as far as you're concerned, or indeed, are there any other pieces not shown in today's video that you happen to like better? As always, I'm looking forward to reading your conversations in the comment section underneath this video. I'd also love it if you would pop an emoji or indeed a social glyph in the comments too, because that does boost the engagement, and the more engagement a video gets, the more YouTube will share it out, which in turn helps us to grow this community. As we've been talking about a painter, a jeweller and a goldsmith, let's do an emoji that represents one or indeed all of those for you. You can pick. You can also find me elsewhere on social media. I will leave links to all the other places you can find me on the internet in my description box. Please do follow me over on some or all of those so that we can continue this conversation and start some others. I do hope that you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, please share it with your friends. In fact, if you like my channel, why not let some pals know about it? And you can let me know you like this particular video by hitting the thumbs up. Please do subscribe to the channel, and if you think you are subscribed, now's an ideal time just to check. Make sure you've not been unsubscribed against your will, and while you are there checking, subscribing, maybe resubscribing, why not hit the bell icon that sits beside the subscribe button, and that way, if you select all as well in the drop down, YouTube will allegedly, they claim, tell you both when I've next uploaded and also when I am planning to go live. We do, however, now have a failsafe. Please also head over to my website, www.katrinamarchant.com. I am going to link it, and add your email to my mailing list, and that way I can email you to let you know what I'm up to, when I'm going to be uploading and also going live talking about the history news, something that I know you are not going to want to miss. I hope you're going to have a great day whatever you're doing, and I look forward to speaking to you all in my next video. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye for now.